Hi, Medical Wildcats. I'm Joseph Guggenheim. I'm a 1972 alum of the medical school, and this month is Black History Month. And in commemoration of Black History Month, I'll be speaking on Bronzeville, that predominantly African-American neighborhood on the south side of Chicago that has a fascinating history. February is Black History Month to coincide with the births of Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass. It's an annual celebration to celebrate the achievements of African Americans. It began in 1926 as Negro Achievement Week, as recommended by historian Carter Woodson. Woodson had some connection with Chicago. He had a degree from the University of Chicago. In 1976, President Gerald Ford officially recognized Black History Month, calling the public to honor the too often neglected accomplishments of Black Americans in every area of endeavor throughout our history. And this year, Black History Month theme is African Americans and the Arts. The Chicago neighborhood of Bronzeville has been the home of many Black writers, musicians, artists, athletes, and other celebrities. It all began as Camp Douglas. The property was owned by Stephen Douglas, and Camp Douglas was a Union military camp on the south side of Chicago. It was a low-lying area, and it was plagued by swampy ground and frozen ground in the winter. The latrines did not drain well. It started out as a training site for Union soldiers in 1861, but the Civil War broke out soon after that, so then it was converted to a prisoner of war camp. You can see on the right the heavy black lines outline the Camp Douglas boundaries, and it was only 2 blocks from north to south, from 31st to 33rd Street. But you can see how it coincided with, or was it contained by the later Bronzeville area. It was built to house no more than 6,000 prisoners, but held 12,000 at its peak. There was overcrowding and poor sanitation due to the double the number of prisoners. So there were outbreaks of dysentery, smallpox, typhoid fever, and tuberculosis, and more than 4,500 prisoners died. About 500 escaped due to bribing of the guards. The citizens of Chicago were fascinated by the Confederate prisoners of war, and they would sometimes go just to look at them, and sometimes they would take some of them home with them. Other prisoners of war escaped by digging tunnels. The prisoners who died were buried in mass graves at the site, and this was the largest mass grave in the Western Hemisphere. But due to the proximity of the burial sites to Chicago's source of drinking water, the bodies were reinterred to the Oakwood Cemetery, which was the only cemetery that would accept their bodies. The Bronzeville area is now bordered by 22nd Street on the north, or some people say it is 18th Street, and on the south, 51st Street, although some will say it's as far as 55th Street, and on the east, Cottage Grove Drive, although some will say it's Lakeshore Drive, and on the west, the Dan Ryan Expressway. Before 1874, this area was dense woods and prairie. Grand Boulevard, now Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Drive, became a popular carriage route for Chicago's wealthy in the late 19th century. The area escaped the 1871 fire because the fire broke out at approximately 10th or 11th Street, and the strong winds out of the southwest spread the fire to the northeast, so the Bronzeville area escaped. Due to the area's proximity to the Loop, the area grew in the 1890s, with wealthy middle and working class American-born residents moving into this area, including those of Irish, Scottish, English, and Jewish German origin, as well as a few African Americans. You can see on the right the mansion of John Shedd, who was president and chairman of the board of Marshall Field, and also gave the name to the Shedd Aquarium. The house was built in 1896 on South Drexel Boulevard. It has since been demolished. Beginning with the great migration of Black migrants from the South in about 1916, the percentage of African Americans and the absolute number grew. The Chicago Defender newspaper, a major African American newspaper founded in 1905 by attorney Robert Abbott, urged Black residents from the South to move to Chicago for jobs and reduced repression. So the rapid immigration occurred in 1916, but it occurred to some degree until about 1970. But when the African Americans arrived from the South, they faced housing that was largely dilapidated and densely populated. It was more expensive than housing in the predominantly white neighborhoods, but the landlords knew that these people could not they would not be allowed to live in the predominantly white area, so they could charge whatever they wanted, and the migrants were forced to pay it. The number and percentage of African American residents increased decade by decade. In 1920, there were about 76,000 residents, and 32% were Black. In 1930, about 95% of the 78,000 residents were Black. And by 1950, 99% of the 115,000 residents were Black. The second and third wards of Chicago's South Side became known under the derogatory terms as the Black Belt, the Black Ghetto, and Darky Town. It is unknown exactly who named it Bronzeville, but it has been attributed to James Gentry in 1930, the editor of the Chicago Bee newspaper, and also to Alderman Lewis Anderson, who in 1922 perhaps suggested the term Bronzeville. Both men are given the credit for this in order to more accurately describe the skin tone of the majority of residents. It also allowed the community to define itself on its own terms. This is a monument on MLK Drive of the Great Migration, and the bronze figure is facing north. He's got his suitcase tied together with rope, and he is covered with what looks like fish scales, but actually they are the soles of shoes. Most of the Irish and Jewish residents left the neighborhood after the 1919 race riots. African Americans survived the discrimination in housing. Black entrepreneurs established businesses which catered to the local residents, but many businesses failed during the Great Depression, while a few survived. The residents of Bronzeville fought bravely in World War I. In honor to honor the all-Black 8th Regiment of the Illinois National Guard, this monument was erected, called the Victory Monument. The African-American soldiers fought valiantly in World War I to free France, and many returned home as decorated heroes. Many of the businesses in the neighborhood went under during the Great Depression, but some survived. Some of those that survived were the newspaper, the Chicago Defender, the Supreme Life Insurance Company, which was a source of life insurance for the African-American population that could not obtain life insurance through other companies, founded by Frank Gillespie, also survived. And this is a picture of the building, which still survives to this day. Bingham Bank was one of the first banks to be owned and operated by a Black banker in the North, survived. It also catered to the Black residents. Overton Cosmetics and Douglas National Bank were founded by Anthony Overton, and his businesses survived. Overton was the son of formerly enslaved parents. By 1930, Bronzeville was the home of about 250,000 African-American migrants, mostly from the rural South. They were attracted to Chicago by the jobs in stockyards, in the steel industry, and on trains as Pullman porters. There was a network of Black-owned businesses and other institutions, including businesses, music clubs, social groups, and churches in the community, especially along State Street, and this was called the Black Metropolis. Residents began to move out in about 1950s, but two-thirds of those that stayed had incomes below the poverty line. There were many famous residents who lived in the Bronzeville area at one time or another. Thomas Dorsey is considered the father of gospel music. He was a blues artist, and he brought gospel music to Chicago. He migrated from Georgia in the early 1900s and became known as Georgia Tom. He played the piano at the Ebenezer Baptist Church, and for 60 years he directed the choir at the Pilgrim Baptist Church. Mahalia Jackson performed at the Pilgrim Baptist Church. She did not hide her political preferences. She sang at Kennedy's inauguration and Dr. King's funeral. Joe Jordan was a band leader and ragtime artist. He wrote over 2,000 songs, and he also arranged music for Louis Armstrong Eddie Duchin, and Benny Goodman. He wrote a Broadway operetta, but was forced to stand outside on the pavement in New York during a performance as the audience demanded 8 encores. There were famous athletes from the Bronzeville area: Jesse Owens and Ralph Metcalf, Olympic sprinters. Metcalf became a congressman and was the co-founder of the Congressional Black Caucus. Andrew Rube Foster was the father of black baseball and the founder of the Negro National League, where black athletes had to play before they were allowed to play in the American and National Leagues with white players. Joe Louis lived for a time in Bronzeville. Dr. Daniel Hale Williams, a graduate of the predecessor of Northwestern, lived and worked in Bronzeville. He performed the first open heart surgery in 1893. He founded Providence Hospital, which was the first hospital in the United States owned and operated by black physicians. He established the first nursing school for black women in the United States, and he established the first internship and surgical residency for black physicians. There were many famous writers who lived in Bronzeville: Ida Wells Barnett, who was a civil rights activist and journalist; Gwendolyn Brooks, the first black winner of the Pulitzer Prize; Robert Abbott, founder of the Chicago Defender, the major African-American newspaper, and creator of the Bud Billiken Parade, the largest black parade in the United States. Richard Wright was an author who wrote novels, short stories, and nonfiction works, many about the plight of African Americans suffering from discrimination and violence. Dr. Margaret Taylor Burroughs was an artist, and this is one of her works, Woman, which portrayed a woman with a half black and half white face and half black and half white body, revealing her belief in racial equality. Jazz musicians in the area include Louis Armstrong, Nat King Cole, Dinah Washington, and Jelly Roll Martin. King Oliver, Sam Cooke, and Herbie Hancock. After jazz musicians finished their 2 or 3 a.m. set, they often wanted a snack which would combine breakfast with supper, and chicken and waffles became popular at several restaurants in the Bronzeville area. The neighborhood is now undergoing a renaissance. There have been major changes taking place. Public housing is being torn down. The neighborhood has been undergoing a renaissance in the last 3 decades. There's been an investment by wealthy and entrepreneurial African Americans and a new appreciation of the cultural institutions, homes, businesses, and churches. The picture on the right is Robson House, the only house in Bronzeville designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. The neighborhood is being renovated and beautified with public art, galleries, boutiques, bistros, coffee shops, and restaurants. And this is one of the public artworks, The Earth Is Not Our Home. Other works include this sculpture garden commemorating the Great Migration and the Ida B. Wells Monument. Northwestern had a presence in the Bronzeville area in the late 19th and early 20th century. We've had 5 campuses now, and numbers 2, 3, and 4 were in the Bronzeville area. Remember, the Bronzeville area was not named Bronzeville until the 1920s or 30s. So when Northwestern was there, it did not have that name. Our second campus, which was the first in Bronzeville, was at State Street and 22nd from 1863 to 1870. At that time, it was known as Chicago Medical College, and it was not affiliated with Northwestern. The campus moved to Calumet and 26th in 1870, where it stayed for 23 years until 1893. And then the fourth campus, which would be the third in Bronzeville, was at Dearborn and between 24th and 25th from 1893 until 1926, when they moved to the Streeterville area. The picture on the right is the old Chicago Medical College building at Calumet and 26th. Northwestern plans to re-enter the Bronzeville area. Northwestern Medicine is planning on opening a facility next year in fall 2025 at 48th Street and Cottage Grove Avenue. This will offer 5 floors of facilities to serve over 50,000 of the local residents. It will offer both primary and specialty care. It will also offer a Northwestern Scholars Program, for high school students who are interested in medical careers. Northwestern Medicine is committed to furnishing quality care to the neighborhood and improving health outcomes by making healthcare convenient and accessible to the local residents so they do not have to travel all the way to the Streeterville area. Well, let's get together again virtually next month when my topic will be in observance of Women's History Month. And please join me for Alumni Weekend, April 18th through 20th at our campus in Chicago. It's a chance to reunite with your old friends, get some CME hours from Northwestern's outstanding faculty, and see what's new on campus. Early bird registration closes soon, so please get your registration in. In the meantime, stay healthy, stay connected with each other, and I look forward to our virtual meeting in March and hopefully in person in April.